Factoring out a numerical GCF. Okay, so now what we have to do is we have to combine some of the things we've learned in previous lessons. We need to be able to find the factors of our terms. Notice this time instead of being listed separately as 8x and 24, we have it listed as a binomial, 8x plus 24. We need to find the greatest common factor between our terms, and then we need to factor it out. What's going to remain after we factor it out is that this 8x plus 24 is going to have something right here, and then we're going to have parentheses that tells us what remains in our original binomial after we have factored out something that's common between the two terms. So our job is to figure out what this number is and then what is left. Notice, if you start with a binomial, you will end up with a binomial in your parentheses every time. In this case, if we have a trinomial, we will end up with a trinomial in our parentheses. Also, notice that if this is a plus right here and we're not factoring out a negative, that plus will remain here as well. And I know we're not factoring out a negative because our leading coefficient is not negative. So we will just factor out a positive number. 8x and 24. Now this part is going to differ between people or students. If you need to go off to the side and say, all right, I have to list all my factors of 8 and I have to list all my factors of 24 and then find the greatest common one and then write that here, that's fine. If some of you are to the point where you can look at these two values and know what the greatest common factor is, you can put that there right away. So 8, 1 times 8 and 2 times 4. And 24 has a lot of factors, remember. 1 and 24, I'm going to have to write kind of small here. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, and in here there's some more, 3 times 8, and also 4 times 6. So there's quite a few of them. I didn't fit them all in that one line. So which is the most common, or what is the greatest common factor? Well, 1 is common, and 2 is common, 4 is also common, and so is 8. So the greatest common factor is 8. We're going to be able to put that right here. And again, some of you could have looked at the 8 and the 24 and known that 8 was the greatest that was in common between the two. Once we put the 8 there, we have to decide what is left in our binomial once we've factored this out. Now what this is actually like is the opposite of distributive property. Okay, we have talked about the distributive property a lot. So if I had 2x plus 2 times x plus 3, to distribute that means to multiply the 2 by the x and multiply the 2 by the 3. So 2 times x is 2x, and then 2 times 3 is 6, and we'd get to this. What we're doing is we're doing the opposite. We're going from here to here. So if we're multiplying to get here using the distributive property, we are actually dividing out a 2 to go from here to here. So we have to say if I take out the 8, what I'm doing is dividing each term by 8. So if I have 8x and I divide that by 8, I'm factoring the 8 out of this. Well, what is 8 divided by 8? Well, that's 1. Now, we don't have to put the 1 there, but it's okay if we do. And there's also an x in this term, and we didn't factor the x out, so we're leaving the x right there. And then similarly, 24, if I factor out an 8, I'm dividing that 24 by 8, and we know that is 3, because 8 times 3 is 24. The cool thing about factoring out the GCF is we can always redistribute that number or term back in to see if we get back to our original binomial. 8 times 1x is 8x, and 8 times 3 is 24. We have factored out our GCF. The second one, I'm going to quickly list 9, 12, and 24 over here with its factors. Okay, so here they are over here. We're going to find the one that, this is a little different, I haven't talked about this yet. This is a little different because we have 3 terms. The same process happens with 3 terms versus 2 terms. We're still finding the greatest common one between all 3. All 3. So 1 is obviously common between all 3. 2 of them have 2's, but this one doesn't. They do all have a 3 though. And then the only other factor of 9 is 9, and neither of these have 9 as a factor. So 3 is our greatest common factor. So we're going to be able to, again, think about how we're going to factor something out and have parentheses left here. Our plus here and our minus here are not going to change. We're going to factor out that 3. That was common between all 3 terms, and then we're going to list what is left after we divide that out. So 9 divided by the 3 is 3. And we still have the x squared because we didn't factor out any x's. And we'll talk more about that later, but we can't factor out any variables because the 24 doesn't have a variable. All three terms would need to have a variable to do so. All right, 12 divided by 3 is 4, and the x right here stays there. And then 24, actually negative 24, but we have that negative right here. 24 divided by 3 is 8. Again, if we check this by distributing, 3 times 3x squared is 9x squared. 3 times 4x is 12x, and 3 times negative 8 is negative 24. And that is why we did our multiplying and distributing in a previous unit, to make sure we could check these that we've factored out the correct GCF.